if we go towards 2030 as a stepping stone towards net zero, what's your views on what the energy mix looks like, particularly around obviously onshore, offshore, in terms of wind and solar on the system as well?
I suppose starting with from our perspective, just purely the solar piece, we'd probably say we can see it providing 20% of kind of power by the end, by 2030. Now that's a blend of about, in gigawatts, probably about 5 gigawatts on kind of utility scale solar, probably something of the order of 1 gigawatt of kind of customer scale. Now, those scenarios were kind of pulled together last year. I think the kind of we expect about 500 megawatts from Res 1 to be built kind of by next year. We've got another 1.5 that just came through Res 2. So that like 5 gigawatts utility scale looks very achievable. I think the 1 gigawatt number on the customer scale stuff is actually quite light, because you don't actually need to put panels on a lot of roofs. We're currently doing a piece of research into that at the minute, and I hope to be able to talk more about that the next time.
Very good. And I suppose, look, if you look at the residential rooftop and what's been done there to date, that's been without the ability to sell back at any
exactly. But even still, like I think according to ESB, there's about 23,000 rooftops that are already there. They're in a position to generate, and that's like, we have about 1.8 million occupied homes in this country, so 1.7. So like there's, you don't need a lot. You add say it's a 3 kilowatt system to 250,000 of those, you start getting into big numbers very quickly.
And you'll get there if you put the stimulus of an incentive behind it.
And we're actually seeing it like with the kind of forthcoming, the microgeneration support scheme due out in July, with the kind of payments starting to flow then. Like I have one member who's telling me they're doing 50 jobs a week in terms of microgeneration, which is,
incredible.
It's an incredible number. Like.
And then in terms of wind, is that the other 60% of the 80% target, or how do you?
Well, so the interesting thing is that people think that we're at 40% and that's just going to stay static. But the truth is that demand is increasing all of the time. So 40% today is not going to be 40% in a couple of years' time. So from our perspective, we want the system to be able to enable what's in the Climate Action Plan. And the Climate Action Plan has a goal of 8 gigawatts of onshore wind and 5 gigawatts of offshore wind. Today, we're at about 4.3 gigawatts installed for onshore wind. There's probably about 1.2, 1.3 gigawatts contracted either through Res 1, Res 2 and corporate PPAs now. So we're in that kind of 5.5, getting up to 6 already. So we've another maybe 2.5 gigawatts there that we need the system to enable. And what I mean by that is we need enough projects coming through planning, coming through the grid connection process to be able to compete in auctions. Not everybody's going to be successful. And I think it's really important that there's a recognition there that we need competition to drive down the price. So while your goals are to try and, hit certain gigawatt targets, you actually need nearly multiples of that coming through the system. And
I suppose that kind of is the point. You have a grid process, you have a planning process, you have this auction process, and you're going to lose projects all the way through. So that really does, your output is delivered green kilowatt hours, but your input is a high volume of renewable projects because you will lose some through the way. And the competition process, the auction is there to try and ensure that you have the most economic blend of projects coming through. And that's life in the big bad world of.
It's like a sales funnel. So you need to have a fat, wide sales funnel.
Exactly. To give you some just a ballpark numbers, there's so in that first phase 1 of projects, they're going to be competing in an auction, say for 2 to 3 gigawatts. There's about 4 gigawatts in that. In the second batch, then we'll say phase 2, there's probably about 25 gigawatts of projects that are all in various stages of development that are going to be competing for an auction for maybe 3 gigawatts. So there's going to be a serious funneling down of projects there. That's first going to happen through the planning process, then through the grid connection process, and then ultimately through the route to market. And there will be projects that are unsuccessful, but they have an opportunity then to try and re-optimize, to become more economic, to change maybe their route to market, to maybe look towards hydrogen, to look elsewhere through maybe a corporate PPA to see can they get a route to market and ultimately deliver onto the system, maybe not through direct electrification or using the grid, but maybe through hydrogen, which is something that's really going to pick up on towards the end of the decade.
And we've just seen the Res 2 auction results come out. Can you give me some insights into the sentiment around the Res 2 auction and then corporate PPAs for for onshore wind in particular?
Yeah, so I think there's probably a real competition there at the moment between the RES support scheme and corporate PPAs, and there's a lot of active buyers out there from large energy users, from pharmaceutical companies that are looking at onshore wind as a cheap form of renewable energy. They're trying to lock them into long-term contracts, and I'd say what has happened with RES 2 is probably there was eligible onshore wind projects that had their planning, they had their grid connections, that they went down the corporate PPA route rather than going into RES. So we had just over 400 megawatts of onshore wind compete in the RES 2 auction. One of the main reasons for, there's a couple of reasons, but one of the main maybe two reasons for that is, one, there's very often a portfolio play when you're looking at a corporate PPA. You don't just go project by project. You actually go for a quantity of energy that needs to be delivered at a certain point in time. And from a developer's point of view, that can often be quite attractive because you're looking at a suite of projects that you're hoping to deliver, and you can deliver them all through one corporate PPA rather than having to wait for sequential auction processes every single year. So it becomes a very attractive way to get your portfolio off the ground. The second reason comes down to indexation. So a lot of corporate PPAs now, the contracts that are on offer are indexed. We've been through such a volatile inflationary period in the last few months. It's very, very challenging to try and estimate how that's going to play out over time. Will there be deflation? Will there be even continued inflation? When you look at the RES auction, you're trying to guess what your inflation levels are going to be like for 15 years. And for a lot of investors, specifically institutional pension investors, pension funds, it's a very uncomfortable place for them to be in. So they tend not to want to put their money into things that are unindexed. And for that reason, I think you see a lot of that type of money, that type of investment fund flow into the corporate PPA market.
Well, I think like where we see kind of the corporates internationally and domestically interested in the solar side, I think it's from the profile piece, because you know it's the certainty of the output, and then it's, you know, I know what this asset's going to do for the next 30 years, and it allows them to kind of de-risk it to some extent. And again, you'd see similar behavior of looking at portfolios of projects, again trying to kind of de-risk across a blend. I think like the smart play, we're probably going to see more and more as we move forward into kind of more these kind of hybrid sites where you have multiple technologies on one site and the kind of firming access. That's going to be very interesting because that's going to play into both the RES and the CPPA. But I suppose we've kind of buried the lead. I suppose the big story about RES 2 really was that 78% of the capacity awarded was solar. So like it's a technology neutral auction, and we've seen solar deliver over 1,500 megawatts, which is just astonishing. It's a real reward to an industry that has been trying to roll a rock up a hill for a very, very long time. And I think developers get a bad rap, but I'm in awe of some of these people, their ability to kind of persevere in the face of such barriers, institutional inertia, lack of delivery of policy. I think it's really quite something. And it is the day that solar came of age in Ireland. And it means that, like, I think as we play forward, the competitive dynamics between solar and wind are going to be really interesting. It's going to make for some lively auctions and I suspect some lively meetings between Noel and myself in the future.
Yeah, just to say, I completely agree with that. I mean, the key message that's coming out of RES 2 is that this is nearly 2 gigawatts of renewable capacity that's going to be delivering for our Irish consumers in 2 years' time. So it really is a great outcome in terms of energy build. We would love to work on the price. I think definitely there's a lot that we can do there to bring down the price. We're probably one of the few sectors across all industries that say, you know, we're too expensive. We want to be cheaper. We want to be cheaper.
Because if you take down the cost, it enables many more commercial models. It allows more of these projects to get built and delivered. Noel mentioned indexation. That's a big concern in the RES process. So you know, that's a risk, and risk has to be quantified and ultimately a number put on it. Networks is a big part of that. There's a huge, and it hits in two sides. One is the actual cost of building the network is very expensive. It's also very uncertain, so you have to build in some risk profile around that. There's also a big risk around the kind of, I suppose we've talked a bit about the enabling infrastructure piece, you know, actually making sure the network can accommodate what comes off these projects. And we're really not building a network to do that at the minute. The network we have wastes so much renewable output at the minute. And the kind of forward estimates only suggest that problem's getting worse. So if they're not prepared to build that network, then that also means that people have to price that in. So yeah, I mean, we want to go to the point where subsidy is not required. And particularly from a just kind of parochial solar perspective, we look over in GB, there's about 15,000 megawatts of solar built there, across rooftop, across utility scale, all different shapes and sizes. And there's a significant cohort of that has now been built without subsidy. That's because they got serious about the cost over there, and the networks companies took a facilitative approach. The UK auction coming later this year, the cap in that is lower than our output bid price from a competitive process. And that tells you how far out of kilter we are. I think it comes to about €68 per megawatt hour is the cap in the auction for solar. And with an average outturn price on Res 2, €97. We really want to be doing so much better than that. As Noel said, like, there's value to it. It's still, compared to the current wholesale price, it's good value. But that's not good enough. Yeah. We want it to be so much cheaper than that.
And just to, I think it goes back to a point you made earlier, Conall, is that, efficient contracts place the risk with those that are best placed to manage it. And right now, we just don't have that in Ireland. We have a huge risk sitting with the developer that feeds into the bid price. Many risks that they're not best placed to manage. So it really is a do what you can, but you're going to have to build your contingency into that. And from what I understand, that's probably not just in the res auction. That's right across a lot of our auctions.